It was supposed to be a normal Thursday morning, a quick checkup, in and out before lunch, but I almost canceled. I'd been running late, the traffic was a mess, and honestly I felt fine. But something told me to go. Maybe it was instinct, maybe just routine. I didn't know that stepping into that quiet, white-walled clinic would be the last normal thing I'd do for months. Dr. Sterling greeted me with her usual smile, but her eyes told another story, haunted, darting toward the hallway every few seconds. She took my blood pressure, asked about my sleep, and then, without a word, slipped a folded note into my palm. I remember the exact pressure of her fingers, trembling just slightly. When I opened it, 5 words stared back at me, written in rushed, slanted handwriting. Don't go home. Run. That's the moment everything changed. I didn't know yet that people were watching me, that files had already been erased, that by sundown I would be running for my life from a secret that should have stayed buried. All I knew was that my doctor looked terrified, and for some reason, she wanted me gone. It started like every other Thursday morning. I left my apartment at 8:15 a.m., coffee in one hand, phone in the other, juggling emails and a half-eaten granola bar as I made my way down the cracked sidewalk toward my car. The sun was just breaking through the clouds, that pale autumn light that made everything look washed out and too honest. I remember thinking I'd be done by noon, just a quick checkup with Dr. Sterling before heading back to the office to finish a report that was already 3 days overdue. I'd been seeing her for years, Dr. Evelyn Sterling, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes, a soft voice, and a habit of making even the most awkward conversations about cholesterol and sleep deprivation feel normal. Each annual checkup cost $120 with my insurance, a routine I'd followed without question for 8 years. She'd been there through my flu seasons, my panic attacks, even that time I broke down in her office after losing my job at the agency. She'd just handed me tissues and said, "You'll start again. You always do." That was her way, steady, reassuring. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and cheap lavender, the kind that came from those $4.99 plug-in air fresheners. A young mother was whispering to her toddler in the corner, and an older man sat across from me flipping through a wrinkled Time magazine from 2017. Everything about it was perfectly ordinary, until it wasn't. When the nurse called my name, I followed her down the familiar hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sterile, almost greenish tint. Dr. Sterling's office door was slightly ajar. I knocked lightly before stepping in. She was standing by her desk, staring at something on her computer screen, shoulders tense. "Morning, Doc," I said, trying to sound cheerful. She startled slightly, then turned to me with a tight smile. "Oh, good morning. You're early." I wasn't. I was exactly on time. As I sat on the exam table, she kept glancing at the door. Her hands trembled when she reached for my chart, and she dropped her pen twice before managing to write anything. I tried to make small talk, mentioning how expensive gas had gotten, $5.72 per gallon that morning at the station on 5th Street, but she only nodded absently. "You seem distracted," I said finally. She froze, just for a second, then forced a laugh. "It's been a long week, that's all." She took my blood pressure, 124/78, and then my temperature, 98.1 degrees Fahrenheit. All normal, but her movements were mechanical, too precise, like she was forcing herself to follow a script. I noticed the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead, the way her breathing quickened whenever footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Then came the moment that changed everything. She stepped closer, pretending to check my pulse, her hand lingering a little too long over my wrist. Her voice dropped to a whisper I could barely hear. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "When you leave here, don't go home." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What?" Her fingers tightened around mine for half a second, and I felt something small and folded being pressed into my palm. "Just trust me. Run." Before I could respond, she pulled back and smiled as the door opened. The nurse peeked in. Everything okay, Dr. Sterling? Just fine, she said brightly. We're all set here. The nurse nodded and left. I looked down at my hand. The paper was crumpled slightly, the ink smudged from her touch. I unfolded it under the table. 5 shaky words stared back at me. Don't go home. Run. I looked up at her, my mouth dry. What is this? What's going on? She shook her head, eyes glassy. Please, she whispered, not here. Then she straightened up and said, in her professional voice, everything looks good. I'll email your results by Monday. Have a great day. I left her office in a daze, clutching the note in my pocket like a lifeline. At the reception desk, I fumbled to pay the $120 consultation fee, my hands still trembling as I slid my card across the counter. The receptionist smiled politely, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her. Out in the parking lot, the world felt different. The air was heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on it. I scanned the lot automatically, half expecting to see someone watching me. A black sedan was parked 2 rows away, engine running, driver inside, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. My gut twisted. I slid into my car and locked the doors. The note was still in my hand, the words burning into my skin. Don't go home. Run. Run where? Why? I glanced back toward the clinic. Through the blinds of Dr. Sterling's office, I caught a glimpse of her silhouette, head bowed, shoulders shaking like she was crying. And that's when I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't a mistake. Something was very wrong, and I was already in the middle of it. Time didn't move normally after that. It stretched, warped, like every second had to fight to exist. The paper in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The words, "Don't go home, run," burned into my palm even though the ink had already begun to smudge. I could still feel the warmth of Dr. Sterling's hand, the tremor in her fingers when she pressed it to me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from my manager. Don't forget the budget review call at 2:30. Bring the updated spreadsheet. The normalcy of it felt surreal. Budget reviews, deadlines, meetings, the rhythm of a life that now felt a million miles away. I typed back, might be late. Not feeling well. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign. Pale skin, wide eyes. A sheen of sweat was forming on my forehead. I didn't even recognize the woman staring back at me. My phone buzzed again, this time a call, the clinic's number. For a second I hesitated, then I answered. Hello? Nothing. Just silence. Then a click. I froze. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message that sounded far calmer than I felt. Hi, this is, it's me. I think Dr. Sterling might have left something in my file. Can you have her call me back? When I hung up, I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. The same black sedan from earlier had pulled out of its space. Its engine idled for a moment, then it rolled forward slowly, too slowly, until it was 2 cars behind me at the exit. A chill ran through me. I pulled out, turning left instead of right, the opposite direction of my apartment. The sedan followed. I drove through the next intersection, pretending not to notice. My hands were slick with sweat, sliding on the steering wheel. I turned again, then again. So did they. It wasn't coincidence. By the 4th turn, my chest was tight, my breaths shallow. I pulled into a busy grocery store parking lot, parked between 2 trucks, and waited. The sedan rolled by, slowed near the entrance, then kept going. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes before I dared to move again. I took the note from my purse, unfolded it carefully, and stared at the words until they blurred. Then I whispered to myself, "Okay, Evelyn. You wanted me to run. I'm running." I opened my wallet, $64 in cash, my debit card, my ID. I hesitated before tossing the debit card into the glove compartment. If someone was tracking me, I couldn't risk leaving a trail. I grabbed my phone, typed nearest motel, and the map filled with red pins. The first one was Cedar Pines Inn, $72 per night. It was only 10 miles away, tucked behind an industrial area. Cheap, quiet, forgettable, perfect. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I checked my mirrors again. No black sedan, no one following, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Whatever Dr. Sterling had stumbled into, I was now part of it. And the part that scared me most wasn't the note or the silence. It was the look in her eyes before I left, like she knew she wouldn't get another chance to warn me. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside the motel window, car doors slamming, footsteps in the hallway, the low hum of an engine idling somewhere in the distance, made me flinch. The neon vacancy sign flickered red through the blinds, cutting my room into pieces of light and shadow. I must have checked the lock on the door 10 times before I finally drifted off, half-dressed and clutching the note from Dr. Sterling under my pillow like a lifeline. By morning, my head throbbed. The clock read 7:42 a.m. I got up, washed my face in the cracked sink, and stared at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot, my hands still trembling slightly. I told myself I was overreacting. People make cryptic warnings all the time. Maybe she was just scared of something personal. Maybe it wasn't about me. But even as I tried to believe that, I was already packing my bag. I left the motel key on the nightstand and paid the $72 cash at the front desk. The clerk, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers, barely looked up as I slid the bills across the counter. "Checkout's at 11, he muttered, stamping a receipt. "You sure you don't want to stay another night?" "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. The drive to the clinic took 20 minutes. The morning light made everything look too ordinary. School buses, dog walkers, a man selling coffee for $3.50 a cup from a corner cart. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When I finally pulled into the clinic's lot, I half expected to see the black sedan again, but the spaces were filled with regular cars, minivans, sedans, an old blue pickup. I walked inside, my stomach twisting. The same receptionist from yesterday was at the front desk, a woman in her early 50s named Marla with short red hair and thick glasses. "Good morning," she chirped. "Do you have an appointment?" I saw Dr. Sterling yesterday," I said. "I just need to speak with her for a moment." Marla's smile faltered slightly. "Dr. Sterling?" She flipped through her computer screen, clicking the mouse a few times. "I'm sorry, but she's not here today." "I know," I said quickly. "I just need to know when she'll be back." She hesitated, then, in a practiced tone, said, "Dr. Sterling has been transferred." It was a sudden change. "You'll be reassigned to another provider." "Transferred where?" "I'm not sure," she said too quickly. "You'll get an update by email." I stared at her. Yesterday she was here. She said nothing about leaving. Marla gave a tight smile, her fingers fidgeting with a paperclip. Sometimes these things happen fast. Administrative decision. Something in her eyes told me she was lying, or at least repeating something she didn't understand. "Can I at least get my medical file?" I asked. She nodded, typed a few things, then frowned at the screen. "That's strange. It says your file's been archived." "Archived?" I repeated. "Yes, it's not accessible in our system anymore." She looked up, uneasy. "That usually only happens when a patient relocates or passes away." I felt the air leave my lungs. "I haven't relocated." Marla flushed. "I'm sure it's a mistake. Let me just quote." But I was already walking down the hall toward Dr. Sterling's office. Her nameplate was still on the door, but the blinds were drawn. I knocked once, then turned the handle. It wasn't locked. The room was empty, not just tidy, stripped. The shelves were bare, the computer gone, the framed diplomas missing from the wall. Only a faint rectangle of dust remained where her family photo had been. A single paperclip lay on the desk, glinting under the fluorescent light. It looked like she'd left in a hurry. I turned to the filing cabinet, empty. The drawers were still slightly open, one hanging crookedly as if yanked too hard. Even the wastebasket was gone. Footsteps echoed behind me. "Ma'am, "You can't be back here," said a man's voice. I turned to see a security guard approaching, mid-30s, crisp uniform, polite but firm expression. "I was just looking for Dr. Sterling," I said. "She's my doctor." "Dr. Sterling no longer works here," he said evenly. "You'll need to leave now." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. He wasn't just enforcing rules. He was watching me, measuring me. "Did she tell you she was leaving?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer, just opened the door wider and gestured for me to step out. As I walked past him, I caught a faint whiff of something chemical, like disinfectant, sharp and cold, the smell of erasure. Outside, the sun had risen higher, blindingly bright. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that building had gone dark. Dr. Sterling hadn't just been transferred. She'd been removed. By the time I left the clinic parking lot, the sky had turned a dull gray, heavy with rain. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't even remember buckling my seatbelt or turning the ignition. It was like my body was moving on instinct. Every rational part of me screamed not to go home, to drive anywhere else, to a hotel, a police station, even a crowded diner. But another part of me needed to see it for myself, to prove that whatever Dr. Sterling had warned me about wasn't real. The wipers dragged across the windshield, smearing thin streaks of water. My mind replayed the look in her eyes, the quiet urgency, the fear she'd tried to hide behind her professional calm. "Don't go home. Run." The note was still in my purse, folded neatly beside the $320 I had left after paying for the motel. I kept glancing at it at every red light, like it could somehow explain what any of this meant. When I turned onto Maple Drive, everything looked painfully normal. The maple trees swayed in the wind, scattering yellow leaves across the wet pavement. My neighbors' kids' bikes leaned against their garage. A delivery truck idled down the street, the driver sorting parcels. I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost hurt. Maybe I'd imagined everything. Maybe Dr. Sterling's message wasn't about me at all. Then I saw it, the unfamiliar sedan parked halfway up my driveway. Black, windows tinted, engine running. At first I thought it belonged to someone delivering a package or checking the meter, but the car didn't move. I slowed down, rolling to a stop at the curb, my heart climbing into my throat. The driver's side window was slightly cracked, just enough to see the faint glow of a cigarette. Smoke curled out, slow and deliberate. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. The car didn't back out. Finally, I pulled forward and parked across the street. I turned off the engine, but left the keys in the ignition. My house sat quiet, the curtains drawn. But as I stared, I saw it. A figure in the front window. Just the outline of a head, perfectly still, facing me. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. No one was supposed to be inside. I reached into my bag for my phone, but the screen stayed black. Dead. I could have sworn I'd charged it the night before. I checked my glove compartment for the pepper spray I'd bought months ago. Gone. Only a handful of loose receipts and a crumpled $10 bill. When I looked back up, the car's headlights flicked on for 2 seconds, then off, like a signal. I forced myself to breathe, counting in fours like Dr. Sterling once taught me when my blood pressure spiked. I could still turn around, drive to the nearest police station, file a report, say someone was watching my house. But my curiosity, or maybe my stubbornness, anchored me in place. I got out slowly, rain misting against my face. The air smelled of wet asphalt and smoke. The sedan's engine purred quietly, steady and patient. I crossed the street, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the mailbox, the figure in the window moved. The curtain shifted, then dropped back into place. I froze. My keys slipped from my hand and hit the pavement with a metallic clatter that sounded far too loud. That was when the sedan's driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, gray jacket, baseball cap pulled low. I couldn't see his face. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to steady my voice. He didn't answer. He just stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding something I couldn't see clearly in the rain. Then, without a word, he turned, got back into the car, and drove away. No signal, no hesitation. I ran to the porch, fumbled with the lock, and pushed open the front door. The living room was empty, but a lamp I hadn't turned on glowed softly in the corner, and on the coffee table sat a single manila envelope. No return address, no name, just my handwriting on the front, written in black ink. It said, "You were warned." The drawer under the TV where I kept my bills was open, papers spilling out like someone had gone through them in a hurry. My insurance folder, labeled neatly with blue tape, was gone. The file that held my medical reports, the blood tests Dr. Sterling had done last month, the MRI results, the receipts for my $150 copay, gone too. Even my late husband's death certificate, the one I'd folded carefully in a plastic sleeve, had vanished. My throat tightened. None of this made sense. Who would want those? I moved into the study, heart pounding. The laptop sat on my desk, the one I'd bought 2 years ago for $1,100 at the electronics store downtown. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Not even the startup chime. I plugged it in, waited, and finally the screen flickered to life, completely blank. No desktop icons, no documents, not even the password prompt, just a sterile white screen. It wasn't broken. It was wiped. I opened the file cabinet beside the desk. Every folder was there except one, the one marked Sterling, C. That folder had contained 5 years of lab results, referral letters, and a copy of the prescription list I'd needed for my hypertension. All gone. I sat down in the desk chair and buried my face in my hands. Dr. Sterling's voice echoed in my mind, calm but urgent. Don't go home. Run. I pulled my phone charger from the drawer, but even my backup drive was missing. I remembered buying it for $89.99 on sale at the tech store, thinking it was overkill to have one. Now I realized it was the smartest purchase I'd ever made, and someone else had it. My pulse quickened as I noticed something else. The printer tray was empty except for a single sheet of paper that hadn't been there before. It was a scanned copy of my husband's old life insurance policy, the one he'd taken out for $250,000 before he died. Only now, the signature at the bottom looked different, thicker, shakier, forged. I backed away from the desk, bile rising in my throat. Someone was rewriting my life, erasing pieces and inserting others. I finally forced myself to open the manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of documents I hadn't seen before. My name appeared at the top of a clinical report dated 2 years ago, stamped confidential, trial participant. There was a signature at the bottom. Dr. L. Sterling. My blood ran cold. I read the first line once, then again, unable to process it. Subject shows sustained behavioral variation post-injection. Recommend continued observation under controlled setting. Post-injection. Observation. Controlled setting. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I realized in one crushing moment that I hadn't just lost my files. I'd lost ownership of my own story. And someone, maybe Dr. Sterling, maybe someone far beyond her, was rewriting it for me. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. At first, I thought it was part of the noise in my head, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind pushing against the windows. But the sound cut through everything, sharp and insistent. The screen lit up on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. My hands were still trembling from what I'd found earlier, but I answered anyway, pressing the phone to my ear. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. You shouldn't have gone home. I froze. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they crawled under my skin like ice. Who is this? I whispered back. Nothing. Just soft breathing on the other end. Then a click. The call ended. I stared at the phone, heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I tried to redial, but the number wasn't stored. No trace. Not even in recent calls. It was as if it had never happened. The house felt smaller now, every shadow stretching closer. I checked the front door again, still locked. The deadbolt, the chain, both secure. The clock above the stove read 11:50. I hadn't realized how late it had gotten. I turned off the kitchen light, but that only made the darkness worse. My reflection in the window looked pale and foreign, my eyes wide and frantic. I reached for the phone again and called David. Straight to voicemail. "David, it's me," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Someone just called." "They know I'm home. Please call me back." I hung up and immediately regretted it. My voice had sounded too desperate, too afraid. If someone was listening, they'd heard that too. I decided to unplug the landline. Something about seeing it disconnected made me feel marginally safer. I pulled the plug from the wall and set it down beside the stack of missing files. The silence afterward was suffocating. Then my cell buzzed again. This time, a text. "Stop calling people. It makes you easier to find." I dropped the phone. It hit the tile with a crack, the message glowing up at me. They were watching me. Somehow they knew exactly what I was doing. I backed into the hallway, my bare feet sticking slightly to the cold floor. My mind raced. How? My laptop was wiped, my backup drive gone. Even the prepaid phone Dr. Sterling gave me last year for emergencies was missing from the drawer. And then it hit me. The security system. I yanked the device from the wall and smashed it on the floor. The screen flickered once, then went black. The phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I hesitated before pressing play. The same whispering voice. "You were supposed to leave town tonight. You didn't. Now you've made it harder for both of us." Then a faint exhale. And in the background, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing off what sounded like my hardwood floors. The message ended. I felt every nerve in my body go still. I turned slowly toward the hallway that led to the front door. The light near the entrance flickered once, then went out completely. And then, barely audible, came the soft creak of a floorboard. Not from the phone, from inside the house. I went back to the clinic 3 days later, even though every instinct told me not to. The building looked the same from the outside. White stucco walls, chipped lettering on the sign that still read Sterling Integrative Health. But something in the air had changed. The place felt emptied out, as if whatever had once pulsed beneath its polished surface had gone dark. 2 nights before, while going through the papers I'd managed to salvage from my ransacked house, I'd found a small brass key taped beneath the bottom drawer of my desk. No note, just a strip of old masking tape and faint writing on the metal. C13. It hadn't made sense then, but now it did. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The lobby was stripped bare, no magazines, no framed certificates, not even the potted fern that always sat by the window. Only the receptionist's desk remained, and a thin layer of dust covered everything. I moved quickly, checking each door down the hall until I reached Dr. Sterling's old office. Her nameplate was gone. My pulse kicked. I knelt down, slid the key into the lock, and turned. It clicked once, a soft, mechanical sound that echoed in the quiet. The drawer resisted for a second, then slid open. Inside were 3 thick manila folders bound with rubber bands. Each had a name written in black marker. Warren, Delgado, and Michaels. The 4th folder stopped me cold. It was mine. Harper, L. I lifted it out carefully. My name, my signature, my address, all in Dr. Sterling's handwriting. The first few pages were standard intake forms and insurance statements, but as I kept turning, the documents grew stranger. A copy of a medical evaluation I'd never authorized, a receipt for $14,200 billed under a clinical trial I'd never joined. Notes in the margin. Observe response to dosage. Subject unaware. My throat tightened. The next section contained photographs, grainy black and white scans labeled with dates spanning nearly 2 years. Most of the pages were filled with indecipherable medical shorthand, but one stood out, a progress chart with my initials and a notation circled in red ink. Unresponsive after injection, recommend relocation. Relocation. A noise came from the hallway, a faint metallic scrape. I froze, clutching the folder to my chest. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice came out small, swallowed by the dark. No answer. When I turned back to the drawer, I noticed something else inside, a plain white envelope tucked against the back panel. On the front, written in Dr. Sterling's sharp, slanted handwriting, were 2 words: "Trust no one." I sat frozen on the cold linoleum floor, the folder spread open in front of me. The word experiment appeared again and again in the documents, each mention more alarming than the last. My name wasn't the only one listed. Beneath mine were at least 7 others, each with patient ID numbers, test dates, and something labeled Series 4A Trials. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. The records looked official: charts, blood panels, dosage logs, signatures. But none of them bore my consent. Not a single signature was mine. A chill crept down my spine as I read a report dated 6 months ago. Subject H. Lewis, administered 0.03 milligrams, compound delta. Mild disorientation noted. Proceed with next phase. My stomach turned. That date matched the day I'd gone in complaining about fatigue. Dr. Sterling had told me it was routine blood work, and she'd charged my insurance $480 for the lab tests. I remembered signing the form, not realizing I'd just given them permission for something far more sinister. My insurance statements showed $8,400 in charges over 18 months for behavioral therapy sessions I never attended. Each injection she gave me was billed at $780. The next report mentioned a patient named Delgado. Next to her name were 2 words written in bold red ink: critical failure. My fingers hesitated before flipping to the next page, where a short summary stated she'd died 2 days after a dosage increase. The clinic had quietly filed the cause as natural complications. There was even a note indicating that her family had received a $25,000 compassion payout from a medical foundation I'd never heard of, Lumen Research Initiative. My breath came short. I remembered seeing that same name once before on an email Dr. Sterling had accidentally copied me on last year. I'd ignored it, assuming it was just pharmaceutical spam. Now it looked like the thread that tied everything together. I kept reading, and the words blurred as the truth formed piece by piece. The treatment Dr. Sterling had been running wasn't for fatigue at all. It was a covert neurological study, testing a serum meant to enhance brain resilience under trauma. According to one summary, the goal was neural adaptation in post-traumatic subjects. That's when it hit me. They'd targeted people like me. Widowed, isolated, struggling with stress and insomnia, people no one would question if something went wrong. The deeper I went, the worse it became. There were signed authorizations from a man named Dr. Malcolm Pierce, a name that appeared next to every payment line. One memo read, "Ensure subject retention. Do not disclose external affiliations. Sterling to manage all contact." Another listed an expense sheet, $326,000 in trial compensation, distributed over a year. Next to my name, I saw $8,450 testing phase 3. $8,450. That's what I was worth to them. I heard a faint sound from outside the office, a creak of floorboards, like someone shifting their weight. My hands froze on the folder. The walls felt too thin, the air too still. I shoved the papers back together, folded the envelope marked "Trust No One" into my pocket, and killed the light. Through the narrow blinds, I saw headlights flash across the parking lot. A black SUV idled near the back exit, engine running, no plates visible. I ducked lower, heart pounding. The passenger door opened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of someone holding a phone to their ear. I backed away from the window, clutching the folder to my chest. My pulse thudded in my ears. The files in my hands weren't just evidence, they were a death sentence for whoever held them, and now they knew I had them. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the pipes, felt like a threat. The folder from Dr. Sterling's drawer lay on the coffee table, its edges curling under the weight of my paranoia. I'd hidden copies in 3 places: under a loose floorboard in the hallway, inside a cereal box, and behind the frame of my late husband's portrait. Still, I knew that if someone wanted them badly enough, they'd find them. It was nearly 2:30 a.m. when my phone buzzed. The number was blocked. I stared at it for a long time before answering, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hello? Is this Hannah Lewis?" The voice was soft, deliberate, female. "You don't know me, but I knew Dr. Sterling. My name's Carol." I didn't respond. My throat tightened around a dozen questions, but she spoke again before I could form one. "You found the drawer, didn't you?" The key she left behind. My grip on the phone tightened. "How do you know about that?" "Because she told me to call you if she ever went missing," Carol said. "And she has." I rose from the couch, pacing. What was she involved in? I read the files, these experiments, the dosages. "They're not experiments," Carol cut in, her voice breaking slightly. "At least not the kind you think. The serum wasn't for healing. It was for control." "Control?" "They were testing behavioral modification drugs," she said. Helix Pharmaceutical won a $340 million military contract for compliance drugs. Project Echo was their proof, testing on unwilling civilians. Dr. Sterling was paid $127,000 per year to recruit subjects. Each successful test earned them $89,000 in milestone bonuses. When subjects like you asked questions, elimination was cheaper than lawsuits. I pressed my free hand to my forehead. Dr. Sterling wouldn't have gone along with that. "She didn't," Carol whispered. "She tried to stop it. That's why she disappeared." The line went silent for a beat, just the faint hum of static between us. Then she added, "You were one of the subjects they tracked, Hannah. You and 34 others. Most of them don't even know yet." I sank back into the couch, the room spinning. "Why me?" "I never volunteered. I never." "They targeted patients with certain neurological markers," Carol said. "People with documented trauma responses. Easy to manipulate, easy to erase." Her voice trembled, and I could hear her pacing on the other end. They wanted to prove they could alter behavior without the subject realizing it. "You were in Phase 3, high-dose observation. You were supposed to be monitored for another 6 months. A chill went through me. "Monitored? How?" Carol hesitated. "Through your insurance records, your phone, your home devices. They were billing you under something called extended recovery support. Check your last statement. You'll see a $312 charge from Lumen Health Systems. That's their front." I opened my laptop, my fingers shaking as I logged into my account. There it was. Lumen Health Systems, Behavioral Adjustment Therapy, $312.48. My chest tightened. I hadn't authorized that. "Your life insurance policy is worth $250,000. A natural death from stress or heart failure would fund the entire cover-up operation. I can prove everything," Carol said quickly, "but not over the phone." They listen. "Then where?" "There's an old motel off Highway 14, she said. "Room 9. Tomorrow at noon. Come alone. Bring the files." Before I could answer, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen casting my reflection, pale, frightened, unrecognizable. The sound of the refrigerator clicked on again, low and steady. For the first time, I wondered if Dr. Sterling's note had come too late. The next morning, I left before dawn. The sky was the color of wet steel, and the roads were slick from the night's rain. I'd packed the folder and a small envelope of cash, $480 left from what I'd withdrawn the week before. Every turn of the tires toward that motel on Highway 14 made my pulse quicken. Carol's warning replayed in my mind. Come alone. You came, she said softly. Good. I set the folder on the table. I brought everything, but I need answers, Carol. Now. She nodded, motioning for me to sit. You deserve them. She reached into her tote and pulled out a thick file bound with a red elastic strap. On the cover, stamped in block letters, were the words, Project Echo, Confidential Clearance Level 6. My name was printed in the upper corner, just above a string of numbers. Hannah Lewis, Subject 47. My stomach dropped. What is this? Carol flipped it open. Inside were forms labeled Behavioral Response Manipulation, Cohort C. Each page carried government seals, Department of Health, National Institute for Cognitive Research, and, chillingly, a logo I didn't recognize, a black triangle with a stylized E in the center. They used you as part of an adaptive conditioning study, Carol said, her voice steady but low. Every subject was given a series of medications under the guise of anxiety treatment. You remember the injections Dr. Sterling prescribed? $220 a dose? I nodded slowly. She said they were to help with sleep regulation. Carol shook her head. They weren't. The compound, labeled E79, was designed to alter the way your brain processed threat. It suppressed instinctive responses, replaced them with programmable ones. That's why some patients became docile, others paranoid. It depended on the dosage and duration. I stared at the files, at the words behavioral conditioning outcomes, 87% compliance rate. My name appeared again beside a list of dates, doses, and annotations. In one column, under observation feedback, it read, Subject exhibits strong resistance to Phase 3 conditioning. Recommend escalation or removal. Removal? I whispered. Carol met my eyes. That's why Dr. Sterling warned you. Once she realized what those notes meant, she tried to pull your file, but the system was already flagging her for breach of protocol. She slid another paper toward me, a memorandum dated 3 weeks before the doctor vanished. It bore the signature of someone from the Department of Defense. The memo's subject line read, Project Echo Asset Consolidation. They weren't studying healing, Carol said. They were studying control, how to rewrite human reaction itself. Fear, loyalty, obedience. My hands shook as I turned the last page. Attached was a printed photo, grainy, time-stamped, from inside Dr. Sterling's office. She was handing me a small white note. The words beneath it read, Subject 47 compromised. Containment protocol initiated. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The air in the motel room seemed to thin, the walls closing in. Carol reached over and touched my arm. Now you understand why she told you to run. I drove home in silence, the road stretching endlessly under the gray sky. Carol's words replayed in my mind until they felt like static. They studied control. Every face I'd ever trusted blurred into suspicion. By the time I turned onto my street, the air felt heavier, like the house itself was waiting for me. The porch light was on, though I hadn't left it that way. My sister, Emily, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. A half-empty glass of red wine rested by her elbow. She looked up when I walked in, surprise flickering across her face before she forced a smile. You're back early, she said. I thought you were staying at the lake house. I changed my mind, I replied. My voice came out too even. Where's Mom? She's upstairs, probably asleep. Emily gestured toward the counter. There's leftover pasta if you're hungry. I ignored the food and set my bag down, eyeing the stack of mail beside it. A thin envelope caught my attention, no return address, just my name printed neatly in block letters. I opened it. Inside was a check. $3,200. Memo line, Behavioral Reporting, Q4. The room seemed to tilt. "Emily," I said slowly, holding up the check. "What is this?" Her face drained of color. "Where did you find that?" "Right where you left it," I said. "Why is my name on it?" She stood, her voice breaking. "Hannah, please don't—" "Don't what?" I snapped. "Don't ask why my own sister is being paid to report on me?" Her lips trembled. "It wasn't like that. They said it was just for wellness tracking. They reached out months ago after your episodes started. They called it a behavioral follow-up program, said it was part of your treatment plan." I felt my knees weaken. "You mean Project ECHO?" Emily froze. "How do you know that name?" "Because I saw the files," I said. "Because Dr. Sterling risked her life to stop them." She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "They told us it was for your safety. They said you were unstable, that you might hurt yourself if you weren't monitored. Mom believed them. They paid the mortgage off Hannah, $48,000, wired directly from some foundation account. We thought we were helping." The weight of her words hit me harder than any blow. "You let strangers track me, drug me, study me. And you thought you were helping?" Tears streaked her cheeks. "I didn't know what they were really doing. They said if we stopped cooperating, they'd cut off Mom's insurance. You know what her hospital bills are, $9,600 a month." I pressed a hand to my mouth, nausea rising. "You should have told me." "They said you couldn't handle it," she whispered, "that if you knew, it would undo your progress." Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Mom appeared, pale and thin in her robe. She looked between us, her eyes heavy with guilt. "He said they'd take you away again if we didn't help," she murmured. "Said you were dangerous." "Who?" I asked. But she only looked at me, her lips trembling. "The man who used to visit Dr. Sterling, the one in the gray suit." For a moment, the house went utterly still. Then the sound of a car door outside shattered it. Headlights swept across the window. Emily glanced at me, terrified. "They're here." I turned off the light. "Not for me," I said, grabbing my bag. "Not this time." The last thing I saw before slipping out the back door was the check still lying on the table, $3,200, crisp and cruel proof that even family could be bought. I didn't look back. The rain started as soon as I hit the highway, soft at first, then relentless, like the sky itself wanted to erase my tracks. By the time I reached the Crestfield Inn, it was past midnight. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, half the letters burned out so it read, "Rest Isle Inn." Rooms were $79 a night, cash only. Perfect. Carol met me there 2 hours later. She wore a baseball cap pulled low and carried a faded leather satchel clutched to her chest. When she stepped into my room, she locked the door, checked the window, then handed me a burner phone still in its packaging. "Don't use your old one," she said. "They've been listening since the clinic." I stared at her. "You mean since Dr. Sterling?" She nodded. "Probably before." We spread her files across the small hotel desk. Receipts, lab reports, coded memos, all fragments of something monstrous. "We'll leak it," she said. "Dr. Sterling was compiling evidence for a journalist in D.C. I know the contact's name, Peter Langford. Works with the Ledger. If we can get this to him, it'll blow everything open." At noon, we packed our things and moved to another motel across town. Carol paid in cash, $164 for 2 nights. "Never stay longer than 48 hours in one place," she muttered, tossing the receipt into the trash. That night, as I drove Carol to meet an old contact of hers, the steering wheel jerked violently to the right. I fought to keep control as the car veered toward the ditch. The front tire had blown, clean, deliberate. Carol jumped out and checked the rim with her flashlight. "They slashed it," she said grimly. "They're closing in." We abandoned the car and walked 3 miles to a diner off Route 9. Inside, the coffee was burnt and the jukebox played faint country music, but it felt safer than the darkness outside. Carol scrawled a note on a napkin, Langford's number, an address in D.C., and a warning. "Trust no one in uniform." When I returned to the motel alone, the door was ajar. My stomach turned. The room looked the same until I saw the drawer open, my laptop gone. The new phone Carol gave me lay on the bed, battery removed, SIM card snapped in half. I sank to the floor, shaking. Every trace of me was being erased, one piece at a time. When Carol called from a payphone minutes later, her voice was low and steady. "They're tracking movement by GPS triangulation now. We've got one shot left, tomorrow night, 11 p.m. Bring what's left of the files. We end it then." The line went dead before I could answer. The next morning, I found him waiting by the motel vending machine. Dark suit, clean shave, shoes too polished for a place that smelled like mildew and cigarette ash. He smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Caldwell?" His voice was calm, practiced. "I'm Agent Dwyer, Federal Security Division. I think you're in danger." He handed me a laminated badge. It looked official, seal, barcode, signature, but so had the last one. "We've been tracking the same group that targeted you," he continued, glancing toward the hallway camera that had mysteriously reappeared overnight. "Dr. Sterling's disappearance was part of a broader investigation. If you cooperate, we can keep you safe." He slid a card across the table. Protective Transfer Authorization, Level 3. Beneath it, a typed figure, $250,000 allocated for witness relocation. The number made me pause. Protection shouldn't come with a price tag that high. "I already have someone helping me," I said carefully. "You mean Carol Finch?" His smile didn't falter. "She's under review for data theft and obstruction. You should reconsider who you trust." My pulse quickened. He knew her name. He knew everything. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Your files," he said simply. "The originals. Hand them over, and I'll escort you to a secure location outside D.C. It should have sounded like salvation. Instead, it sounded rehearsed, too smooth, too prepared. Dr. Sterling's handwriting flashed in my memory. "Don't go home. Run." I reached for my bag slowly. "Give me 1 hour," I said. "The documents are in the car." He nodded, stepping aside. "Of course." Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the cracked asphalt. I didn't look back as I climbed into the rental and started the engine. The package arrived 2 days later, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address, postmarked from Baltimore. Inside was a small flash drive taped to a folded note. "Play it somewhere safe." My hands trembled as I slipped it into my laptop, half expecting the screen to go black. Instead, Dr. Sterling's face appeared, tired, pale, eyes darting off screen like she knew she was being hunted. "If you're watching this," she began, voice breaking, "it means I didn't make it." She exhaled shakily, then glanced down at a folder labeled Project Echo, Behavioral Response Manipulation. "What they told us was a cognitive conditioning trial," she said, "was never about therapy. It was about control." Behind her, papers were scattered across a desk, memos stamped with U.S. Department of Defense, confidential, and one line underlined in red ink. Subject elimination threshold, $12,800 per individual. "I thought it was a mistake," she continued, "until the first patient disappeared." Her voice lowered. "They used our data to test psychological endurance under stress, how much fear, pain, and suggestion a mind could take before breaking. You weren't patients, Evelyn. You were prototypes." She looked directly at the camera now, her voice trembling. "The money we were promised, $2.5 million in federal funding, was funneled into private accounts. Every subject who questioned the protocol was marked for extraction." A sound cut through the recording, a door creaking open. Sterling flinched, eyes wide. "They're here," she whispered. "Trust no one, especially anyone claiming to protect you." The screen froze on her face mid-turn, then flickered to black. For a moment, I just sat there, the air thick with static and dread. Outside, a car engine idled too long beneath my window. When I looked down, the flash drive was still warm. On its side, A faint engraving I hadn't noticed before caught the light. Property of ECHO Division. And that's when I realized it wasn't over. It had only just begun. When we finally saw it, the facility looked less like a lab and more like a mausoleum. Concrete walls streaked with rust, windows boarded shut, a single door padlocked with a chain. The faded sign above it read, Ravenhill Behavioral Research Unit. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and chemicals. Our flashlights skimmed across overturned chairs, broken monitors, and abandoned patient beds. Every corner felt haunted by whispers of what had happened there. Carol led me to a locked archive room. "This is where they kept everything," she said, voice barely audible. She used the same key Dr. Sterling had left me. The drawer groaned open, revealing stacks of manila folders, each marked with a patient ID and a red stamp. Terminated. One bore my name, Subject 47, next to a date scheduled for evaluation 3 months after my husband's death. My stomach turned. Carol flipped through others. "Look at this," she said, spreading them out across the desk. Each file contained financial records, payments of $12,800 wired to compliance officers, cover-ups disguised as grants, and lists of psychological parameters labeled threshold tests. Then she found a binder labeled ECHO, Phase 3 Implementation. Inside were photographs, dozens of faces. Men, women, even children. Victims, all categorized under failed responses. "They erased them," Carol whispered, trembling. "Every one of them." Somewhere above us, a light flickered, then went out. We turned toward the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hall. I grabbed the files, shoving them into my bag. Carol killed her flashlight. The footsteps turned into a rush of motion before I could react. A flashlight beam blinded me, and a rough hand yanked the bag from my shoulder. Carol screamed my name, but someone grabbed her too, forcing us to the floor. Cold metal cuffs snapped around my wrists. I could hear the faint hum of a generator, and then the voice, steady, controlled, familiar. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. I looked up and saw him, the same man who'd offered me protection. His badge glinted under the dim light. "You were never supposed to find this place." They dragged us down a corridor lined with broken tiles, into a room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. In the center stood a table with restraints and an IV line still hanging from the last experiment. A man in a black suit placed a syringe on a tray. "This will make it look natural," he said flatly. "An overdose, stress-related." I thought of the $15,000 payment my sister had received. The bank records, the bribes, the lies. All of it led here to a quiet erasure. Carol tried to speak, but one of them hit her hard enough to make her bleed. My pulse roared in my ears. Then came the sound. Thunder at first, then clearer. The crash of doors. Shouted commands. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The room exploded in chaos. Gunfire cracked. The lights blew out. I hit the floor as agents swarmed the hallway, shouting orders, dragging the men in black to their knees. The man with the syringe tried to run, but Carol tripped him, screaming. When the dust settled, an agent knelt beside me, unhooking the cuffs. "You're safe now," he said, but his voice barely reached me. Safe didn't feel real. Not after everything. As they led us outside, the night air hit like a rebirth. Somewhere, Dr. Sterling's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't go home. Run." For the first time, I finally understood why. The cameras clicked like a swarm of insects as I took my seat before the congressional committee. It had been 6 months since the raid, since the night the truth finally clawed its way into the light. The room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves, and when the chairwoman called my name, I steadied my voice. I told them everything about Dr. Sterling's note, the erased files, the injections, the bribes, the men who'd tried to silence us. Each word felt like peeling back a scar that had only just begun to heal. Across from me, rows of officials sat stone-faced as documents flashed on the projector. internal memos stamped Project Echo, invoices totaling $3.4 million in behavioral studies funneled through a shell company in Maryland. When they showed Dr. Sterling's photo, I had to look away. Her sacrifice had cost her everything, her job, her freedom, her life. But now, her name was being cleared on record. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, Helix CEO, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. 7 clinic administrators were arrested and charged with medical fraud. Project Echo's $23 million budget was frozen and redirected to victim compensation. Carol testified too, her hands shaking, but her resolve unbroken. We later split the $200,000 whistleblower settlement, not because of the money, but because it meant acknowledgement, proof that what we endured mattered. 3 months later, I founded the Sterling Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to victims of unauthorized medical research. Our first grant, $50,000, went to a family in Texas whose son had been part of a similar experiment. Each case reminded me how easily the system had looked away. A victims' fund of $12.3 million was distributed to 47 families. Average settlement, $261,000 each. Dr. Sterling was posthumously cleared and awarded a congressional medal. Sometimes at night, I still hear echoes of that phone call, the whisper that told me not to go home. But now, I understand it wasn't fear keeping me alive. It was purpose. On the day we unveiled Dr. Sterling's memorial plaque, I stood beside Carol in the rain, watching her name shimmer against the granite. "She didn't run," Carol whispered. "No," I said quietly, tracing the engraved letters. "She made sure we could." And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt like peace. Thanks for spending time with this story. If it resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone else may need to hear it too. Watch another real-life journey by clicking on the left and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.